Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht. I am Managing Director of Membership, and on behalf of my colleague Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our Space Forum this evening, Hollywood Goes to Space. So this is our first Space Forum of 2024, so welcome. We had a little work to do to get everything scheduled, some speaker scheduling changes, but we're hoping to get a good program for you for the entire year. And I'll share a little bit more about what we're planning as we go through my initial slides here. As always, I'd like to just go over the agenda. So virtual etiquette, we'll have a few NSS announcements, then talk about those upcoming space forums and town halls, and then we'll get into our program, and then we'll close for the evening. For virtual etiquette, we always encourage you to submit questions. It's best to use the Q&A function because it's easier to pull them out from there. And feel free to use the chat. It's okay to do that. But we also ask you to be respectful of the panelists and the audience because everyone can see those questions and comments. We did get a lot of questions that were submitted beforehand, and our speaker is going to try to address as many of them in her presentation as possible, but we'll have time at the end for you to actually ask questions if you wanted to turn your mic on, and we can do that. We've had some pretty good success with doing that in the past. So we're looking forward to some great dialogue. As always, we encourage you to give to our cause. If you're enjoying programs like this and the space forums, town halls, please donate to NSS. I just want to thank everybody who's donated so far this year. We've got some great donations, and we appreciate your support. I will be posting the link into the chat if you'd like to do that during the session. Also, there is a post-Space Forum survey. It only takes a few minutes to complete. So once you exit the session, you'll go right into the survey. It's completely anonymous, and your feedback really helps us in planning future events. I'd like to just do a few quick announcements, so bring you up to speed on some things that have happened or that will be happening. We did hold our inaugural members tour of the Kennedy Space Center on January 12th to 14th, hosted by Galactic Medallion. It was a really, really great event. We had 3 really full days, I will tell you that. There are just a few of the shots that and few of the things that we saw at the Kennedy Space Center and also Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So it was a really enjoyable tour for everybody. And I participated. I would encourage people, if you're interested, we are definitely going to be doing this tour again. And here they are. We actually, the picture on the left is at a place called Gators Dockside, and it's in Port Canaveral, right across from where SpaceX brings their Falcon 9 first stage rockets back. So you can see a rocket right there from a Falcon 9 that had recently launched. So it was a great spot, and we had Jean Wright gave a great talk about So Sisters. We had her as a Space Forum guest last year, and it was fabulous. And we also took everyone in to see our NSS office at the Center for Space Education. So we've started planning for the next tour. We've decided to hold off trying to do this in the spring because there's just so many things going on. So we're aiming for September, October. We hope you can join us, so look for the details as we move forward. Also upcoming big later this year, the International Space Development Conference 2024. It's the 42nd annual ISDC. It's interesting, I attended the very first one in Los Angeles. So it's great to go from 1 to 42. We hope you can make it. We've got some great sessions and workshops and keynotes. There you can see just a few of the topics that'll be covered, everything from space solar power to Mars to living in space. The theme is of course, oh boy, I can't remember what the theme is. What did we have that? No limits, that's right, no limits in space is the theme. So we hope you get a chance to make it out to Los Angeles. NSF members, of course, receive a discount on registration. The registration is now open, but this is an amazing opportunity to meet and engage with space leaders, astronauts, scientists. We've got a great lineup of speakers. You can learn about the most latest achievements in space, what's coming up next, and you can really get energized about our future in space. So definitely encourage you to make it out. We'll be doing more of these announcements as we go along and tell you more and more about the ISDC. And we hope to share some insight into what's happening with ISDC in future space forums. Also, last before I turn over to into the program, someone is I'd like to make sure someone's on mute here. We've got I hear some background noises, so please make sure you're on mute. We've got a special launch event opportunity.
Gary.
Okay.
Gary.
Who is talking here? Fred, can you make sure everyone's muted? So we've got a special launch event coming up next week here at the Kennedy Space Center. I know this is really short notice. If you're in the area, if you're in Florida, we'd like to invite you to this launch opportunity. SpaceX Nova C, what's called the Intuitive Machines-1 mission, that is going to be launching at 12:57 a.m. Eastern Time on the 14th of February, early Wednesday morning. At pad 39A. So we actually have an ability to get out to the Kennedy Space Center Banana Creek launch viewing area. This mission is carrying the Nova C lunar lander that was developed by Intuitive Machines. And one of the payloads that's being carried is a series of artworks by famed artist Jeff Koons. And he's developed a project named Moon Phases. And you can see the picture there with Jeff and also Chantel Beyer of what those little moon phases cubes look like. They're about 1 inch in diameter and a really, really fascinating design. Chantel is one of our NSS board members, and she's also the founder and CEO of a company called For Space. She has been involved in this project from the very beginning. Her company designed the container that's holding all of the artwork and will protect it on the lunar surface. But her company is working with another company called media.com, and they are sponsoring this. So this enables us to do this at no cost, but you will have to be at the Kennedy Space Center visitor complex by 11 p.m. on the 13th. You can register by up to Saturday. We need to have your name in by Saturday so we can get that into security at the Kennedy Space Center, and we'll be sharing all the details. So if you can make it, it would be great to see you. We've got almost 100 people coming already, and we'd love to have you there. Again, no cost, but we can't provide any other travel funding. You'd have to get here on your own and be there. But I will post this also into our into the chat, so you have that information. But again, we'd love to have you join us for that. So now let me move on a little bit to talk about what's coming up next. Next week, we have a town hall that we're going to be talking with John Daigle about policy and the upcoming March storm that will happen in March as we go visit members of Congress and Senate to promote space exploration and settlement. On the 7th of March, we have Maximizing Your Solar Eclipse Experience with Jim Plaxco. The solar eclipse is happening on April 8th, and you might want to find out how you can best experience it no matter where you might be. We are going to be doing a town hall on April 11th, and that's going to focus in on the ISDC 2024. We're working on that now. We hope to have some of the speakers who will be at the ISDC joining us for that evening. We are working on a lot of different topics. Really want to try to get a calendar that gives you the ability to do long-range planning. So that's what we're working with, and I hope next week we'll be able to share more about that. So now, before I go into the program, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd like to introduce our NSS CEO, Anita Gale, who has joined us this evening. Anita, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, and welcome everyone. We're glad you're here. This is one of my favorite membership benefits, these space forums. We can actually thank COVID for getting us started on these, and it is well worth continuing doing these. And kudos to Bert and to Larry for putting these together and keeping this going. I would like to echo something about ISDC. Actually, the planning meeting or a planning meeting concluded about an hour ago, actually less than an hour ago. So we are in active planning for our ISDC International Space Development Conference in Los Angeles, end of May. We have some exciting speakers. We're pulling together the speakers for the oh, I am so sorry, for the plenary events. And we have some exciting speakers coming up. So looking forward to seeing you at ISDC, and enjoy the program. I don't need to take more of your time. You are here to witness a very special event tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Anita. Everybody, I'm going to share my screen again and get ready to introduce our guest speaker this evening. So I had a chance to meet Danica at our Space Settlement Summit back in October, and she gave a really fascinating talk about space in the movies, and we discussed how interested our members would be in this. So Danica Vallone is the founder of and CEO of Hen Industries. It's a LA-based design and fabrication company for film and for retail. But they've recently been expanding into other areas like health and aerospace. Danica has spent a lot of time looking at the whole fascination of Hollywood and space. And I think you're really going to enjoy this presentation a great amount. So we've titled it Hollywood Goes to Space. And now it's my pleasure to turn this over to Danica. So I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. And Danica, it is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see if I can make this work.
We always wonder about that with technology.
Let's see. Share sound is on. Yes. Slideshow. Okay. So tonight, we're going to discuss the complex and tumultuous affair between what I now know to be the two great loves of my life, space and storytelling. And I think in order to do this, we're going to start at the beginning, or at least a beginning. It is 1955. The most powerful storyteller in the world has reached the zenith of his career. And to what has he turned his eye and empire toward? Well, to this. Oh, let's see here.
Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Each week as you enter this timeless land, one of these many worlds will open to you. Tomorrowland, promise of things to come. Presenting this week from Tomorrowland. Here to introduce you to this new series is Walt Disney.
In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has upon our daily lives. Discoveries that were miracles a few short years ago are accepted as commonplace today. Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow. One of man's oldest dreams has been the desire for space travel, to travel to other worlds. Until recently, this seemed to be an impossibility. But great new discoveries have brought us to the threshold of a new frontier, the frontier of interplanetary space. In this Tomorrowland series, we are combining the tools of our trade with the knowledge of the scientists to give a factual picture of the latest plans for man's newest adventure.
So that was a clip from Walt Disney's series Tomorrowland, which aired in March of '55 to 100 million people. To contextualize that, the Super Bowl last year aired to 115 million people. That's some pretty extraordinary reach. Disney was a fiscally very prudent man. He had a practice of keeping film production costs down. But in the case of Tomorrowland and this series, the subject of space travel had so captured his imagination, it loosened his normally tight grip. He actually lavished an enormous sum of money in the project, and he uncharacteristically gave carte blanche and essentially a blank check to produce this series. He'd fallen in love with Collier's series prior to that, and we were kind of in a golden age of the excitement of the imagination of the country toward exploration and what could be possible at this point. And this series ended up becoming critical in garnering not just the public's attention, but political attention, and made the rounds in the White House circuit and Capitol Hill. So each part of this series ended up featuring and heavily relying upon the input of the often on-screen presence of Wernher von Braun. Most of you here know who he was, but those of you who don't definitely should. A very controversial figure at this point, certainly. He was still irrefutably one of the single most important rocket developers and champions of space exploration in the 20th century. Inventor of the V-2 rocket, former director of NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, even founded the National Space Association, which turned into the National Space Institute, which later came to be known as a little org you may have heard of called the National Space Society. All started there. So von Braun passionately believed in the need to excite and motivate the public into broad public support for spaceflight. Pardon me. Let's get this way. A moment, guys. There we have it. So as a result of his involvement with Disney, he ended up becoming a household name in homes across America. One of the first televised celebrity scientists, von Braun grasped at every opportunity, private and public, to talk and write about spaceflight. He addressed writers, publishers, educators, engineers, all across the board. The more reach, the better. He actually kind of subsumed his lifelong obsession with rocketry and aerospace directly to instead speak on and devote the rest of his career to educating and kind of helping to whip public opinion in the direction where it needed to go. Not too dissimilar, for those of you who saw Oppenheimer, to Oppenheimer's, at least in the film portrayal, obsession with the science at all costs, and then sacrifice of his one true love into fighting the fight and becoming a speaker and representative toward the responsibilities and the pitfalls of what those technologies could bring about. So I just kind of want to take a moment to bask in the profundity of this choice and the cost that came to each of those men in this case. Disney, like I said, pinnacle of career, unfettered reach, and what does he choose with his unlimited amount of resources to focus on? He chooses space. Von Braun shifting his attention to tell the story. So the overlap here, I think, is really worth noting and is part of what really kicked off the public fervor and love that we still rely upon to this day. That said, could use a little workup, I would say. So let's do a little tone shift here. How many of you have heard the theory that we never actually landed humans on the moon? That it was actually an elaborately staged filming in a secret studio somewhere as some desperate attempt by America to publicly beat the Russians to the moon? Because any true believers out there know the world is flat and we cannot escape our sky envelope. So soak in this little gem here while I tell you about a little factoid with a NASA and entertainment industry collaboration. Particularly note this all around the globe portion. So in 2009, NASA hired Hollywood filmmakers to digitally enhance the footage of the Apollo 11 moon landings for the program's 40th birthday. They employed a company called Lowry Digital. It's the same exact team who remastered Casablanca and Citizen Kane. And so, of course, this collaboration between NASA and the Hollywood machine played into the conspiracy theories and the claims of those who consider the moon landing itself to be a hoax. Now, this very vocal minority believes that one of the pinnacles of human scientific achievement and general exploration was actually made in a Hollywood basement. The thought being that none other than this guy, director Stanley Kubrick, created the footage of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon in a soundstage in England. Kubrick's vision of space travel in 2001: A Space Odyssey was so impressive and the visuals so realistic that the hoax supporters claimed that the film itself was nothing more than the means by which NASA tested the cinematic techniques to pull off this giant con on the world stage. What a compliment, I have got to say. So let's see here what all of the fuss was about. Full claim.
Daisy, give me your answer to I am crazy, all for the love of you.
The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. We are all foolproof and incapable of error.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
Whew, gets me every time. High praise, Christopher Nolan there too. I'm having trouble with this weave through here. So, we are all foolproof and incapable of error. An excellent and lingering line, prescient now with the dramatic steps forward and AI and artificial life integration kind of breathing down our collective necks. So 2001 was made in 1968, blink, and that'll be 50 years ago. All of those special effects that we witnessed were practical, meaning that they had to physically make them all. There was no CGI that was available. And they were staggering in size and scope, and in some cases in predictive accuracy. That scene where he's running in his centrifugal ring, that was a fully practical set, and it cost $750,000 to make in '67 when it was built. And Kubrick didn't like the first one, so he had them make another. With inflation, that is, I don't know, several $1 million. So I'm sure there were some unhappy producers on that one, but what does it do? It gives us incredible legacy. This film stands the test of time, and it topped the best of charts to this day. So where and why does this succeed where so many others have failed? Kubrick, foolproof and incapable of error, perhaps. He was obsessive and an absolute maniac, but we're not going to get into that tonight. Instead, we're going to talk about reason 2, which is scientific advisors and the hierarchy of film. So Scientific advisors are called upon to help filmmakers create scientific visuals, to check facts, to provide logical explanations for speculative and fantastical situations, and to help coach the cast on how to act like scientists. It is a pretty good gig if you can get it. But as we all know, they are often ignored. And let's talk about why. There's a real answer for it. It's nuanced, but if you were to put a single title on top of it, it's this: there is a language barrier between the scientific community and filmmakers, yes, and frankly, between scientists and much of the general public. There are many steps of translation that don't often get made. Inaccurate science in entertainment text is succinctly referred to by the scientific community simply as bad science. Fair. Scientists external to the production process believe there's a tension in filmmaking between accuracy and entertainment. And that's a very reasonable assumption, but that's exactly where it goes wrong. You're trying to use reason. Simply put, for the filmmakers, there is no tension. There is only entertainment. Accuracy is only important if filmmakers believe it generates entertainment value. That's one of the sentences at the heart of it all. It only matters if it generates entertainment value. That doesn't mean we've lost. That just means we have to maneuver the messaging in a way so that it still delivers entertainment value. Any science that's going to detract from an audience's enjoyment of a film is bad for a filmmaker, regardless of whether or not it's accurate. So I do spend a lot of time, like Bert said, thinking about how we can make science in entertainment products more accurate. But for a science advisor, this is the wrong question to approach a filmmaker with from the start. The more useful question to start with is, how can accurate science make your film better? How can the truth of a situation, if you just take the time to explain it, and we're going to have to figure out how to sugarcoat it so people want to hear the truth, make the story bigger, bolder, more engaging. Science needs to conform to the notion, science and storytelling, of theatrical sincerity. The scientific sincerity means you're taking a scientific context as part of the film's natural landscape. So to kind of put a bullet on it, the financial success in films is directly tied to how well they convey a sense of realism and provide a suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief is a really, really sacred phrase and concept, and it's at the crux of a lot of what I spend time thinking about and a good bit of what we're going to talk about tonight. Even some of the questions that I was able to take a look at ahead of time have a lot to do with the relationship in the suspension of disbelief. So a skilled science consultant can be invaluable in creating this believable fiction, but you have to know how to translate. And part of the reason that 2001 was so successful is because Kubrick had Arthur C. Clarke writing it with him in tandem while they were in development. And as we all know, Clarke knew his way around a whole lot of things. So they're already off to a better start than most. And then the production designer that he hired, and I'll show you some of the hierarchy inside of film structure, actually wasn't from film. He was a NASA conceptual artist. And that is why a lot of the designs that we see have merit still. So I'm going to peel back the curtain a little bit inside of film structure for us. Contrary to what you may guess about those zany Hollywood folk, the business and operational systems of a full film set crew are highly regimented, almost militaristic, honestly. There are strict chains of command and protocol, and to step outside of that faces serious backlash. The unions have very clear borders and boundaries. This graphic, you don't have to dig too deep inside of, but it just kind of visually represents a lot of the interrelation between completely different departments and the phases and stages and the amount of collaboration that has to happen. And we're probably all familiar with organizations that are incredibly complex, especially having the interests that we all do here at NSS. One of the significant differences, however, is the time index here. In film, we are building worlds, shooting them, making them exist, conjuring them from nothing, and then oftentimes throwing them away in a matter of months. whereas it takes decades for a lot of other industries to do anything close to that level of at least visual or narrative accomplishment. So it is a complex and chaotic process involving hundreds, sometimes thousands of people with a very limited amount of time and money to bring the film to its completion. Additionally, a film culture is not an egalitarian community. They have this rigidity that we've talked about. There are superiors, subordinates, conflicting and overlapping departments, no shortage of egos. But again, the time crunch kind of changes things. A lot of people, certainly the ones that work in my department, which is production design and art department, we work when we're lucky, 12-hour days. 14, 16, 18-hour days are not uncommon. It is just what is expected of you to build the world, take it down, figure out how to be 3 places in once. It's a grueling pace. And so for a scientific advisor, they have to be trained in a lot of this structure and understand to whom, when, and how to package the information so that it can land. Because I tell you what, if you're speaking to a clapper loader about, you know, the nuances of alternative propulsion methods, it's going to fall on deaf and irritated ears. So there's a lot that we can do on the other side of this to help kind of groom our advisors to land the point and stick it better and where we need it. This, for reference, is just my piece of the pie here, from art director down to all of the construction jobs and departments, supervisory sections. It's hard to overemphasize how many kind of heads there are in this beast. So, you know, what have we made with all of this might and this incredible speed, this victory and organization, and the combining of these 2 incredible realms of human machinations? Let me show you. See, there's a lot. You don't even need to look at this. You just need to know that it exists, and it's a lot. Okay.
Forward, drifting to the right level. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down. Houston, tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed.
Rocket, we copy you down, Eagle.
That's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over.
Ready to go?
We now have had confirmation of loss of signal from Apollo 11. Apollo 11 is on the far side of the moon.
Neil, you are dark on the rock.
Mission is a go. They have 21 minutes.
Okay, so there we have it. One of humanity's pinnacle moments of achievement, glistening in a tightly packaged 90-second clip designed to stir a deep, patriotic, aspirational set of feelings to inspire us all to buy toys. Now, Michael Bay is not known for his accuracy. And yes, there's an opening shot of Apollo 11 on its way to the moon without the lunar module attached, immediately followed by a shot of it with the module attached. And sure, you can see the full ascent module is still attached to the LEM descent stage on the moon, and the pressure in the EMU suits is wrong, and their body movements are wrong, and clearly they're just rigged in a 5-point harness, and our gravity offset is off. And there would not have been all of that debris around them before they began their lunar descent. And to my knowledge, there was not a crashed alien ship with Optimus Prime waiting inside of it. However, that was the real Walter Cronkite footage. That was actual mission control celebrating the real footage. There is real documentary footage spliced all throughout the opening of this film. And while it's true Michael Bay doesn't know anything about rocket science or doesn't care, he does know a whole lot about selling tickets. Transformers actually continues to be one of the highest grossing entertainment properties of all time, especially when you take into account all of the merchandising and the toys that come out from it. So how did we get here? How did the moon landing of '69, one of the all-time most audacious feats of human achievement, end up as this overblown 7-part, 17-hour toy commercial? And that's not even the staggering part. The staggering part is that it continues to sell. It continues to top the lists. So we've seen some good, 2001, and we've seen some bad. Now let's see some ugly, which I will probably have to exit the full screen for. Yep. Stand by.
Gear up for the best film about drilling into an asteroid and nuking it since the one that came out 2 months earlier. And let yourself enjoy this guilty pleasure that's the movie equivalent of Taco Bell. Looks okay on the surface, but for the love of God, don't think too hard about what's inside. Get ready for a Michael Bay version of space, where fiery explosions happen in a vacuum, meteorites are filled with explosives, asteroids look like they were designed by Tim Burton, astronauts only walk in straight lines, Michael Bay works at NASA, space cars have guns, spaceships have guns.
What are you doing with a gun in space?
Space dementia exists and is a thing.
He's got space dementia.
Drunk Russians can Fonzie a spaceship back to life. And it's easier to turn oil drillers into astronauts than teach astronauts how to use a drill.
I asked Michael why it was easier to train oil drillers to become astronauts than it was to train astronauts to become oil drillers, and he told me to shut the f*** up. So that was the end of that talk.
But this movie isn't just about things exploding while guys make loud noises at each other. It's also about love.
Aww. Okay. It cracks me up every time, but the real joke underneath here, or maybe the horror, is that this film was officially supported by NASA and given what was at that time unprecedented access to NASA's facilities and personnel. How? Why? How do we make films like this that gross millions of dollars over and over with absolute trash science and complete disregard for any attempt at positive or thoughtful conveyance of the reality? Look, it's easy for me to stand here and crack jokes and talk trash, but it's not like I don't personally have blood on my hands. I make these things for a living. And sometimes it actually gets a little disheartening to be in a position to know how to tell stories like this at this scale and scope, and to know what it is to be able to find and build teams who can move mountains in minutes, to build these worlds and tear them down and do it over and over again with this machine-like precision. And it's all attuned and coming together to take this idea, to sculpt a story, and then sit you in a dark room with a big screen and set your hearts and minds on fire. It's sacred in a way. And it provides an escape, yes, but it also provides a map. And I'm sick of drawing maps to convince you to buy this body wash, to drink this soda, to dress this way, plump your lips, smile bigger, when I should be out there drawing maps that help bring us to the stars. And you see, I'm getting a little personal at this point, but most days I have to go out there and pretend to care about things that don't matter. And then I have to trick all of you into thinking that they do. But guys, they don't. I mean, zoom out. Your mortgage, your taxes, your toothache, your car, it doesn't matter. And zoom out again and out again past that, and maybe equip a little bit of that Vulcan stoicism, because if you zoom out far enough, nothing matters in the vastness of the cosmos, and not one thing we say or do is going to move the needle, really. My life, Elon Musk, Albert Einstein, Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, Helen of Troy, just dust, stardust. But before I get us a little bit
Gear up.
and forget how to navigate my slideshow, I'm going to move us here. I am going to use the words of one of my all-time favorite moments in film history. All of these moments will be lost, like tears in rain. My beloved Roy Batty from Blade Runner. And if you look too long under the wrong rock, this is me now, it's hard to come out from under there. And sometimes the empirical evidence of our own insignificance gets heavy. But let me try to explain in this language that I best know how what I mean. With your blessing, let me have 5 minutes, you, me, and some help from the brilliant creators over at Kurzgesagt, okay? Here we go. Human existence is scary and confusing. A few 100,000 years ago, we became conscious and found ourselves in a strange place. It was filled with other beings. We could eat some could eat us. There was liquid stuff we could drink. There was things that we could use to make more things. The daytime sky had a tiny yellow ball that warmed our skin, and the night sky was filled with beautiful lights. This place was obviously made for us. Something was watching over us. We were home. This made everything much less scary and confusing, but the older we got, the more we learned about the world and ourselves. We learned that the twinkling lights are not shining beautifully for us, they just are. We learned that we're not at the center of what we now call the universe, and that it is much, much older than we thought. We learned that we're made up of many little dead things, which make up bigger things that are not dead for some reason, and that we're just another temporary stage in a history going back over 1 billion years. And we learned in awe that we live on a moist speck of dust, moving around a medium-sized star in a quiet region of one arm of an average galaxy, which is part of a galaxy group that we will never leave. And this group is only one of thousands that together make up a galaxy supercluster. But even our supercluster is only one in thousands that make up what we call the observable universe. And the universe might be 1,000,000 times bigger still, but we will never know. We can throw words around like 200 million galaxies or trillions of stars or bazillions of planets, but all of these numbers mean nothing. Our brains can't comprehend these concepts. The universe is too big. There's too much of it. But size is not the most troubling concept we have to deal with. It is time, or more precisely, the time we have. If you're lucky enough to live to 100, you have 5,200 weeks at your disposal. If you're 25 now, then you have 3,900 weeks left. If you're going to die at 70, then there are 2,340 weeks left. A lot of time, but also not really. And then what? Your biological process will break down, and the dynamic pattern that is you will stop being dynamic. It will dissolve until there is no you left. Some believe there's a part of it we can't see or measure, but we have no way to find out. So this life might be it, and we might end up dead forever. This is less scary than it sounds, though. If you don't remember the 13.75 billion years that went by before you existed, then the trillions and trillions and trillions of years that come after will pass in no time once you're gone. Close your eyes. Count to 1. That's how long forever feels. And as far as we know, in the end, the universe itself will die and nothing will ever change again. Now, I have a bad habit of inducing existential dread in many people, and in the last few minutes, I probably haven't helped much, but stay with me just a minute longer while I offer a different way of looking at these things, an unscientific, forgive me, subjective point of view, a little dime store philosophy, if you will. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't know any more about human existence than you do. I just like to counter this existential dread with a bit of optimistic nihilism. What do I mean by that? Well, to summarize, it seems unlikely that 200 trillion stars have been made for us. In a way, it feels like the cruelest joke in existence has been played. We became self-aware only to realize the story is not about us. And while it's great to know about electrons and the powerhouse of the cell, science doesn't do a lot to make this less depressing. But so what? You only get one shot at life, which is scary, but it also sets you free. If the universe ends in heat death, every humiliation you suffer in your life will be forgotten. Every mistake you've made, it will not matter in the end. Every bad thing you did will be voided. And if our life is all we get to experience, then it's the only thing that matters. If the universe has no principles, the only principles relevant are the ones we decide upon. And if the universe has no purpose, then we get to dictate what the purpose is. Humans will more certainly cease to exist at some point, but before we do, we get to explore ourselves and the world around us. We get to experience feelings and food and books and sunrises and getting to be with each other. The fact that we're even able to think about these things is kind of incredible. It's easy to think of ourselves as separated from everything, but this is not true. We are as much the universe as a neutron star or a black hole or a nebula. Even better, actually, we are its thinking and feeling parts, the sensory organs of the universe. We are truly free in a universe-sized playground, so we might as well aim to be happy and build some kind of utopia in the stars. It's not as if we found out everything there is to know. We don't know why the rules of the universe are as they are, how life came into existence, what life is. We have no idea what consciousness is, or if we are alone in the universe. But we can try to find some answers. There are billions of stars to visit, diseases to cure, people to help, happy feelings to be experienced, and video games to finish. There is so much to do. So wrapping up, you've probably used a good chunk of the time available to you. And if this is your one shot at life, there's no reason not to have fun, live as happily as possible. Bonus points if you make the life of other people better. More bonus points if you manage to help build a galactic human empire. Because the distance we've all traveled between Once Upon a Time and the next Falcon Heavy launch, it's not nearly as far as we might have thought. All right, so let's stop there, guys. And I'm gonna have a sip of water. And Bert, what do you think? Should we ask some questions? Should we talk about what I plan to do about this? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, let's do some questions. And I know you want to share some things later about what you're doing and actually ask for some help from our NSS members. So I think we'll do some questions. We've got a number that are in the Q&A, and of course, a number were already submitted. But I want to ask one of mine first. It just got me thinking when you showed that Armageddon video. And I know for myself, being an engineer, a lot of friends don't want to go to a movie with me because they think I'm too critical of things.
Sure.
And I just want things to make sense sometimes. And for a movie like Armageddon, I realize it's strictly entertainment. I don't even worry about a movie like that. Let it be entertainment. I know it's not based in fact, but I can only say from J.J. Abrams' versions of Star Trek, I really wanted to like the movies. But when he built the Enterprise in a cornfield in Iowa, it just ruined the entire thing for me. And my friends just didn't understand that just couldn't happen. Is that, in dividing it that way, is that a way we can look at films and really decide whether they're worthwhile for us?
Yes. And I would rephrase the question, because it's one I grapple with constantly, is are the gifts greater than the sins? And that's kind of the takeaway that we have to have in a lot of these films. And it is a pretty subjective experience, certainly. I think what you started with in the question was, I would rephrase as when you sit down at an Armageddon film and it's going to be popcorn, cotton candy, trash, right? You are equipping a very different set of suspension of disbelief. You're feeling particularly generous, right?
That would be true.
Yes. And so we're kind of hardest on the things that we love and the people who are trying the hardest. And so we have to be careful not to be discouraging and tamped down attempts, because frankly, with very few exceptions, any kind of space discussion that meets the general population is a good thing, even if it's terribly done. And I would say specifically to the Enterprise being built in a cornfield in Iowa, it's trash science, but what is the symbolic significance of that? That says to an agriculturally based, middle to lower income, lower educated, middle America potentially, hey, this could be happening in your backyard. This is within reach. This is attainable for you. It's moving it into a realm of every man. And there's value to that.
Sounds good. I want to get a couple questions in that people asked, because I think they're interesting. Do you have a movie that you consider the most accurate space movie?
It's a tough one. You know, and by what metric? Some of the ones that get held up the most often and with good reason, 2001, you know, standing the test of time on a lot of fronts. Apollo 13, you know, they're for the most part really following a lot of the book of what happened, and they worked very hard to have a high fidelity in that. And the omissions that they made and the corrections for the most part were to maintain the kind of pace, the cadence, and the heart of the story where it needed to go. The Martian comes up all the time, you know, like we who are deeper into the world of space and love have bones to pick with it, but by and large, that's because it's the prettiest belle at the ball and all eyes are on it right now. I would even say that something like, this is kind of off the path, but Don't Look Up, that came out fairly recently, right? That took a basic, plausible context, and what it did incredibly, I think realistically, is it spoke to the kind of range of responses that different facets of the world population would have. And there are a lot of really thought-provoking conversations and illustrations that come from something like that.
And just a kind of a follow-on, is there a fictional film that you think got the science most correct?
I think Don't Look Up is a really good example of that, actually. It's not rooted, and I mean, it's not basing off of any historical fiction, and it doesn't, science is not the main character, right? Space is not the main character in that film. Some of these, like The Martian, for example, space is a character. It's Matt Damon versus the environment, right? So it's his co-star. And there's a lot more weight that's put on the precision of that portrayal in that situation versus something like, I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy, where it's like, it kind of just so happens to occur in space and on other worlds. You know, it's a device and not a character.
Right. I'm going to take another question that came in, and I think you kind of alluded to this as you did your introduction, that, you know, you're involved in this industry and you're helping make these movies, and sometimes there's not much you can do about it, right? So the question here is, does it bother you, for example, in Star Trek and Star Wars, that nobody's weightless and there are no maintenance EVAs? You know, are there things that bother you that filmmakers do?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I drive my friends and family crazy also watching things. And I drive them crazy on two fronts at once, because it's not just the science and the space angle, but I also know all this minutia of art department. And I'm like, well, clearly they didn't reset the cigarette length in that scene. You know, there are all kinds of like little continuity things I'm annoying about. But for the sake of everyone's sanity, I try to filter that out a little bit. I would say for something like, specifically, it was, you know, Star Trek, which is part of the question, right? And Star Wars. Right. The size and the scope of the storytelling that's happening is large enough that those things are forgivable in the balance. But there's an opportunity, if it's not too difficult or annoying or expensive, for the productions to just put that in account. And those are areas in which we can make incremental improvements, I think, with some cleverly placed advisors, which is part of what I'm hoping to kind of help contribute to the industry, and may start to be a specialty in, you know, the next decade plus of life's work, if I'm lucky.
There were a couple questions about a movie that is out now or just finished its run. And
yeah.
we've actually had a lot of exchanges on NSS email about it. ISS. Have you had a chance to see it? And what are your thoughts about that movie?
I have seen several clips, and I saw an early release unfinished cut of it. So I didn't see start to finish the theatrical release that you guys did, but I'm very familiar with it. And I've actually, on a side project, been spending a whole lot of time and energy looking into what combat in space would actually look like, and both how to shoot it and how to do it for real, and how to capture it if it's happening for real. So ISS is also a huge topic among my peer group right now in that overlap space. The movie itself is very silly in very many places. It's in its execution and some of the choices it makes. There are moments when it is incredibly sloppy with some of the technical stuff and, the gravity's on, gravity's off. What is gravity? I don't know, knife slams on table and bounces. Like what, how, a lot of incongruities, but it is an important question to be asking. Both because I think as a species, we do two things consistently. We fight and we do the other F word. And that's how we, perpetuate ourselves. And so if we are truly to be a spacefaring species, these are questions that we're going to need to start to answer for ourselves. And then there is probably the more relevant and pointier part of this, which is the geopolitical angle and the politics that are involved there. And I think that the vast majority of the general populace does not understand that there are such serious tensions that are happening between our nations in the space landscape. And I think it's important that people start to know that there are some real risks and tensions, that there is a race to the South Pole of the moon right now, that control of that is going to be incredibly, incredibly important for how we shape what our life on Earth looks like. So it starts to butt up against those questions. And one of the ways I ask myself is, if I'm a high school teacher or a JC professor, is this something I would screen to my class because I know that it's going to kick off some heated debates? And ISS does qualify in that way.
Yeah, I saw it, and like you said, there are lots of things that you could take issue with, but I asked the question: would people who've worked together for so long and have relied on each other as a team turn on each other? And actually, I was on a webinar with Scott Kelly, and he actually talked about one of his Russian colleagues who he spent almost a year in space with, and he actually said we can't talk anymore because his colleague's view on the war in Ukraine, and I'm like, wow, these were people who spent almost a year together, and he said they can't talk to each other now, and so so that part resonated quite a bit.
It really does. And you would hope, especially when faced with the possible extinction of the entire species, that the few remaining humans would figure out how to, just for the sake of perpetuation of our kind, figure it out with each other. But we don't know. I mean, the amount of rage and grief and fear that they're going to be experiencing as all of their loved ones are vaporized down below makes people do unpredictable things.
Right. There was I didn't see the whole comment in the chat, but someone mentioned the movie Marooned. I actually like that movie and like to watch it. And what are your thoughts on Marooned?
I haven't caught Marooned yet. It's high up on my list. Yeah,
okay.
I know. You would be shocked at how large my my reading and watching list is, because it's not, it's TV shows, it's documentaries, it's pilots that haven't even been produced, and it goes all the way back to silent films. So I'm very diligent about it. And as a result of this meeting tonight, I will move it up on the list.
Sounds good. I'd like to get your thoughts.
Happily.
Let me get a few that were in the Q&A.
Okay.
And this is from Carl. What do you think might be a good space movie to make in the future that might capture the interest of our public?
It's about balancing, I think. Well, what's your get? What are you trying to accomplish? Who's paying for it? Do you need for people to be more inspired to join the space sciences? Because that's one type of film. Do you want to rouse a different, or a sense of pride and a drive for glory in people, which I love to work on and do? That's kind of structured a little bit differently. Do you want to kind of find ways to, I call it a spoonful of sugar, or to sugarcoat a lot more factual hard science, and then you would take a slightly more documentarian angle, but then kind of spice it up along the way? We'd have to kind of get a little bit more specific about what our targets and goals are here, because it's a big, wide landscape, I'm pleased to report. And we can set most things in space if we want to, because what it is it provides us with a case use of extreme circumstances in which we can look at human behavior through a very intense lens. And that's valuable as a storytelling mechanism.
Right. Question from Larry. Why hasn't anybody done Larry Niven's Ringworld as a movie? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, Larry Niven's Ringworld IP, the intellectual property, has been tied up in producer negotiations for quite some time. So it's in kind of what we call script purgatory right now. And it has been initially greenlit for production a couple of times, but you know, there's a whole lot of failures to launch in this business. Here's like a pinnacle example, and one that I would really like to see come to the screen: Stranger in a Strange Land. You know, like what an it was, I don't know if it still is, the highest selling science fiction novel of all time, right? So why haven't we seen that? And what better time, you know, a human that is born under the surface of Mars comes back to Earth. Like we're really ready to hear that story, but that one is locked up in so many layers of bureaucratic IP legal trash right now. It would take some huge names to get that one out of jail, and a whole lot of firepower coming from the heart and the pockets to make it happen.
Dale has actually a comment here. I'd like to get your thoughts. So he says, I don't agree that all science in movies, even bad science, is good. Bad science supports conspiracy theories.
Yeah, yeah. Solid point. And whenever I say that, I always get some pushback about it, which I love, by the way, because it lets us dig into it a little bit more. And I'm kind of a little bit purposefully troublemaking with a statement like that because I want to have the discussion. And you know, there's a lot of danger in bad science and conspiracy theorists. And we've seen, you know, we've seen that turn really ugly with COVID and anti-vaxxing and the amount of misinformation that was spreading all over the place. You know, to a certain extent on all sides, there was just a lot of corruption and bleed in information that happened. So there's a danger inside of poor storytelling. I absolutely acknowledge that. But I think I'm kind of coyly leaning on the principle that, you know, all press, even bad press, is good press. And, you know, if you make a real steaming pile of poop or dangerous kind of film, hopefully there are enough of us that are fighting against it, crying out against it, and making counterpoints that we might be able to bring some of the converted that are watching that back into a more reasonable fray. Can also go the other way. I'm just saying that in general, people should be thinking about space more. I would say, I don't know what your guys' experience is. You know, I go out to a little greasy spoon diner in the outskirts of Chinatown in a rough industrial neighborhood, and I strike up some conversation with the people waiting to get let in, and I ask some space questions. A lot of people don't even know that NASA still exists, that there is a space program at all, that there is a space station, much less that the ISS is going to be retired soon, or that there's anything else up there. So the barrier for entry for even basic level knowledge, which, you know, the lowest common denominator of awareness, needs to get pulled up.
Right. I'm going to take a few more and then we'll let you talk about some of the things you're doing now. Carl asked an interesting question. I don't know if you know the answer to it, but he said, did George Powell, who made Destination Moon, ever meet Von Braun or Disney? Interesting question.
Probably, you know, probably. It was a pretty tight-knit group, you know, and they were relying upon each other really heavily. And it was definitely, I've never kind of thought of it this way, but there are certain movements, powerful movements that happen in clusters of people, like the surrealist movement, you know, the beat movement, things like that. I would go so far as to say that, you know, the space education and storytelling movement in a way was happening, and everyone who is even remotely engaged in it would be gravitating to the same place and the same people. And I'm hoping that there might be a little bit of a renaissance of that glory day upon us if we're clever about it right now.
Have you watched the series From the Earth to the Moon on Apple? What are your thoughts on that?
Not only have I watched
Not From the Earth to, I guess, For All Mankind. Sorry, For All Mankind.
I know. Well, both. Actually, we did the suits and the props for both of those.
Okay.
So I know it very well. We also did the LEM for the Transformers series and those suits. And, you know, so I'm kind of up in the business for a lot of this stuff. But I think that that's another really excellent example of reasonable and important speculative scenarios Man in the High Castle also did a very similar thing, if you guys are familiar with that, where it's, what if the axis of evil had won against the Allied forces, and what would things look like for us? And I think it's a really excellent thought experiment. I also think it's timely because getting to see America on its heels a little bit, not the triumphant victor of all things in the moon race, and having to recover from that, that's a bit of humble pie and reframing that I think has some value to it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that things played out the way they did in reality. But there's a lot of there. I'll also say though that it's a little bit too it's hot take right now. It's a little bit too soap opera drama-y in terms of its writing and delivery style for me.
Yes.
But the premise, solid.
Sounds good. I'll just close on one thing. From the Earth to the Moon, I used to do a presentation about, it's called From Goddard to Apollo, about the history of the moon program. And I always show an episode From the Earth to the Moon, a clip called Spider, when they're trying to figure out what to do about the size of the windows.
Mm-hmm.
And it said, what if we don't have any seats? And which actually happened from Grumman. And I just point to that. It's one of the best episodes I've ever seen about what engineers do. And I always try to highlight that.
A beautiful example. And the things that keep singing to us, no matter how many times we watch them, like that does clearly for you, even right now. I mean, that's at the crux of the magic of what we're trying to hit right now, in the collaboration between purposeful storytelling and, if not completely accurate, respectful science.
Right. Sounds good. So we're at a few minutes after 10. I know you have a little bit more to share with us, and you actually want to ask for some help from our NSS members. So why don't I let you turn it back over to you, and then if we have some time, we can close out with some questions.
I would absolutely love that. Okay, so let's do this. Are we there? Am I up?
You are up, yes.
Beautiful. So it's true. I have Hen Industries. It's a fabrication company in the entertainment business. I serve as creative director over at Global Effects, which is the largest supplier of specialty costumes and props in the space industry. But all of this, I feel like, is culminating in what I hope to be my greatest and most important work, which is making space a creative space agency. And it's going to really kind of exist exactly in the overlap of the storytelling around humans in space, past, present, future. So whether that's, consulting for B2B or new tech development companies and figuring out how to get their stories out, or it's figuring out how to get the Super Bowl commercial to not use such a trashy spacesuit, since they're going to have 115 million people watching. I hope to be useful on both of those fronts. And I hope that you guys can help me with this in the following ways. So I'm amassing an incredible and impressive group known as the League of Extraordinary Scientists, which are going to be experts in their field, with an excellent ability to communicate as well. And, there have been science advisors in films for a very, very long time, and it's a very respectable profession. But like we talked about a bit earlier, they're not necessarily trained in knowing when they could be most effective, to whom they should be speaking, and how to package their message in a way that's easily metabolized by their targeted person, so that it can then be processed by the machine and make it out to the audience. So I feel like I'm uniquely poised to be able to speak to both sides of that and to translate. And my question to you all is, if you are an expert in any of these fields and you are passionate about lending your voice to this, please drop me a line through, it's makingspace.earth is the website, and we can give you some links toward the end here, and let me know how and why you want to contribute, and I would be honored to collaborate. One of the other things that we are doing here is building a scientific accuracy scale for films. So think Rotten Tomatoes percentage score of accuracy, But we're going to do some other metrics as well. So this bar, this colored bar here, would represent the time signature scene by scene, and we would get to analyze where and when the scenes are true, true-ish, false-ish, false. We might even also do a metric that we can change the brackets on if you're feeling particularly generous, if you're just at a baseline of giving, sincerity with your suspension of disbelief, or if you want to be very, very strict about it. And then this color and the score would change according to which lens you toggle onto. But in order to do this, we're going to start with 10, maybe 12 of the films that, some of which we talked about tonight and were mentioned in the comments, and we're going to dissect them together and give the scores to kind of prove the concept. Eventually, hopefully, this will become a big forum and a place for discussion and, healthy, respectful argument. And maybe, just maybe, we can start getting placed in some award shows and ceremonies so that an award goes to the film that does the best job of conveying scientific accuracy. And if we're able to amass that kind of influence, it will turn the heads of the C-suite producers because it will equate to money and viewership eventually. So there is, if you were to scroll down on this is just a screen grab, but if you go to the website, there's a place for you to be able to vote on which of the films you want us to dissect first, and start getting your yayas out and duking it out in the comment section if you want. And so to that end, we have a framework here of the 7 deadly sins of science fiction filmmaking, work in progress, and we can talk about dissecting any of these that you like to your heart's content. And I'm trying to cluster things together. Violating consent speaks to what we're talking about with world building and suspension of disbelief. So you, the filmmaker, the creator of the world, have built this universe for us. And in exchange, we're going to follow the rules you've laid out, and we're going to feel feelings and take meaning from it. But if in the course of that very same film, you violate the terms of your own contract, it's insulting, frankly. So there are a lot of those kinds of violations. Actorly nonsense is, there's something called business, actors business, and that's just kind of the stuff that they're doing in the background with their hands. They're like squeezing some fluid from the pipettes into the tubes, and they have no idea what they're doing, but it's just business happening in the background. There's all sorts of trashy, messy, completely ridiculous science that's happening as filler, like prop filler. And there are real opportunities there to do valid, worthwhile things. It just requires a little bit of conversation. Non-survivables, that's like in and out of airlocks all the time. Crazy pressure changes, temperature changes that aren't being talked about. There are no hoses connected to anything that would fall under non-survivables. And a lot of times, lone genius fallacy, as we all know, it takes a village to do the kinds of things that we're doing. And something like The Martian starts to fall into lone genius fallacy. And yeah, it's compelling, and sometimes you are alone, but other times, and in general, it would be nice if we showed that there is a greater system of interdependence and reliance possible. Unrealistic tech speaks for itself. Wonky flight patterns are crazy. The amount of time to get from place to place, they violate the rules of all the time. Faster than light travel gets very messy. Physics, schmizzics, there's a lot that can fall in there. So basically, it's an invitation to you all to kind of hop in to the conversation, reach out. Yes, the Making Space graphic does have Morse code. Thank you for looking at that. It says Making Space over and over. One of our other facets is going to be diversity, but actually, and we make models for the vision impaired population too, so that they can try to understand and see, for lack of a better phrase, some of what's going on in space without relying purely upon visuals. Also, sonification is an area that we're working in a good bit. So yeah, I think if people have stomach for it, I will stay as long as you like for questions. Bert, you're on mute.
Yeah, I saw that and I just needed to unmute. I usually don't make that mistake. So let me just get to a couple other questions. And in terms of contacting you, that website, we can put that into the the chat. So I'm sure some people might be interested in being part of that. There was a good question that was submitted, and in a way you've touched on this, but what extent do movies consider the ethical and moral implications of space exploration and settlement?
Very little. Harsh answer, but very little. You know, it goes back to what we talk about. It only matters what the entertainment value is. So you have to kind of seduce them with saying, I will add entertainment value if only you will listen to me long enough to let me prove it to you, and, you know, make this part of the storytelling sexier. It's going to sell more seats, you know?
Right.
You know, there was a really good question that I loved that got asked a couple times, a couple different ways, but it's along the lines of, why are a lot of these films portraying such a hostile version of Hostile to Humans, Martian, Gravity, Interstellar? And that is a really good question. Some of them aren't, you know, there are, like I said, there are the silly movies that, you know, just have space as a backdrop and they don't worry about it. But if we're dealing with, like I said before, space as a character, space is a cruel character to have to push against. You know, it's indifferent to us. You know, it's not that it's trying to kill us, it's that it doesn't give a shit, you know? And we aren't made to be there. So it is hostile. And I think it's important that we manage to show that that is true, but that it's by our ingenuity and the fire in our bellies that we're going to figure out how to make it work anyway.
Someone asked about the depictions of gravity, physics, and sound, and is that realistic in space? And it reminds me, I was at a Star Trek convention, and they were showing a clip of a spacecraft going through space, and for some reason the sound wasn't working. Okay, but I yell out, "Well, there is no sound."
Exactly.
But everyone was thinking that you have to hear the engines of this spacecraft as it's moving through space. So it's a good question. You know, it's why can't they just pay a little bit more attention to physics?
Yes, you know, and sometimes it's plausible and sometimes it isn't. It's funny that there is that question too, because I think in the copy on the website for the scale, it says something like, "Are you growing horse trying to scream your discontent into the void that doesn't have sound anyway?" You know, so like I get it, but that I also, along with these 7 deadly sins, I want to kind of create a system of hall passes as well, things that we can all collectively agree are understandable passes. Like we do need to be allowed to show that sound in space. Like that's very limiting to storytelling, unless that's a very specific plot device for you. That would be a hall pass.
Right. My colleague Larry Ahern has his hand raised. Larry, did you have a question? You're on mute, just as a reminder, like don't make my mistake.
Oh, okay, yeah. I just wanted to point out that a long time ago, Gene Roddenberry had some of us come over there and see the studio, and we actually go on to the set of the Bridge of the Enterprise. And I says, I was very underwhelmed by this. I said, this is so mundane. It's nothing. And then all of a sudden he goes over, he has his assistant go over there, change the lights, change the sound, change the whole thing, and all of a sudden it comes alive for you, because the set itself is really mundane, but the thing is he makes it, like you said, that's when you show that graph there where all these parts, they all come together to make a movie like this. And if there's some parts of it not well done, you could see it. And
yes.
That's why I said when a lot of these things, like in 2001, when they're showing all these things, Fred Ordway was telling us how he had to fight like to get a lot of these things as accurate as he could.
Mm-hmm. It's very true. And you know, there are a lot of cheats in movie magic that are part of kind of our language and they're in our arsenal. So, you know, it's very jarring, even for me when I first started in this business, to see the difference between your perception as a viewer and then what it's actually like when you're walking on the set. It's a little bit of a letdown on most sets, actually.
Yeah, I was with a company back in the 70s, 80s. when we supplied material for the movies. I don't know if you remember Ringo Starr, the Stone Age thing. The thing is, our company mined pumice. And I got a picture. I got a picture of myself holding a 3-foot wide boulder over my head, but it's hardly weighs anything. All you do is they painted all these things for the movie like this. And I says it's remarkable how they can take something that doesn't seem extraordinary and then they change it.
That's right, little alchemy there.
Yeah, the movie magic, as they call it.
There's an interesting comment. I know we're pushing 10:20, so I'd like to get just a couple more in if it's okay with you, Danica. Yep.
Yeah, good.
Very good. Dave Stewart has an interesting comment here. He says science and film needs to be classified with 2 frames of reference, I think. The science at the time of the movie was made as one, and then the science as we understand it today. And that, that really makes me think one of my favorite movies of all time is The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it's a simple science fiction movie, but there's a scene in the movie where someone asks Klaatu about how fast, that spacecraft might travel. And he said, well, about 4,000 miles an hour in the atmosphere, and then significantly more once it's in space. And I'm thinking, well, if you're only going 4,000 miles an hour, you're not getting to space. So I'm just wondering, maybe I thought they would have known that at that time when they made the movie, or maybe someone just didn't ask. But Dave has a good comment there.
Definitely, and I think that would be provided for if we're able to do what I'm calling like the Goldilocks addition to the scale. There's the baby's bed and the mamas and the daddies of, if you're feeling very generous. I think in general, we're going to judge a film by the science of its time as a baseline. But then if you want to toggle into the let's follow the rules by the book version, then we would definitely be evaluating it by current knowledge.
A couple last questions. Larry asks about The Expanse. Any comments or any interesting secrets?
Oh yeah. Expanse is a good one. It brings up points in a way that no other story did. And there's also some nonsense that happens, of course. But like a lot of airlock traveling between Nagata, all that kind of stuff. But it's one of the first mainstream breakouts that lets us see what different classes of society and almost like socioeconomic groupings would look like in interaction with one another, and it illustrates it really beautifully, and it does a very good job of nodding to some really juicy scientific and physical facts that help kind of distinguish the difference between the groups. I mean, Mars gravity versus Earth gravity versus Belter gravity, and how that changes the evolution of the people in a core physical way. That's beautifully illustrated by the Expanse series. It's elegant, and that's an excellent example of the scientific truth doing a very good job to help with the value of the storytelling. That's an advisor or, a writer or whomever is responsible for that, who really, really had that in mind and figured out early enough on that it can be implemented and harnessed the whole way through. So I'm a big fan of it. And there is some secret backstory to that, just a little bit, which is that, that was never expected to be as successful as it was. It was not supposed to do that well. And that's why you see such huge difference in the production value between the seasons. It was sort of like an accidental runaway success, which, I mean, good for them. And I think it's a case study when I sit down with producers that I use to say, look, there's more of an appetite in viewership than you might be acknowledging here.
Right. I'll just add, Bill added in a comment after my comment. He said the escape velocity is only applicable on a ballistic trajectory. Okay, thank you, Bill.
I love you guys.
If you had a continuous propulsion, you could get to space at 50 miles per hour. That is true.
Bill, you write to me about that League of Extraordinary Scientists bit, all right?
Yes, Bill would be a good one to add. Absolutely.
Nice.
So, So very good. I think we're at 10:25. I think it's a good time to end. And so, Danica, I want to just thank you so much. It was so enjoyable. I enjoyed it the first time I saw it at the Space Settlement Summit, and it just refreshed me how entertaining it was and informative it was. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight and joining in. So I think if you do have a chance to put in the website, we can put that into the chat. I think someone asked about that, but I'll be able to follow up with everybody with all the contact information on that. So if you do need that, everybody, we can get that to you. I'd also like to thank Anita Gale, our CEO for NSS, for being here and doing a welcome. And also my two NSS colleagues, Larry Ahern and Fred Becker, for everything they do to support these space forums. I saw a hand was up, but it looks like the hand went down. So I think we'll end it there. So everybody, I'm just going to share my screen one last time as we close out the evening. So let me do that. Okay, and here we go. So everybody, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, it's our first Space Forum of the year. I hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to seeing you next week for the town hall on our March Storm activities that will happen next month in Washington, D.C. So please join us for that, and we'll make sure we put together a great program for you over the course of 2024. So thanks again for attending. For those of you in our time zones, have a great evening. For those of you in tomorrow's time zones, have a great day. And of course, everybody have a great weekend and stay safe. So thank you all for joining us tonight. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off our recording. And there we go.